It's easy to forget how fragile our bodies are. But like it or not, every one of us is one mishap away from a life-threatening emergency. And that means everyone is always also a mishap away from being a bystander to someone else's worst day ever. Most of us have at least a rough idea of what to do when someone is in distress. But there are also a lot of first aid myths out there, and knowing what to do in an emergency can be the difference between a good outcome and not. So we decided to bust a few of the most common first aid myths out there and help you fill up your metaphorical first aid kit. Right off the bat, we have to say this is not medical advice. We are not doctors, we are just YouTubers. If you're ever in a situation where you need to provide first aid to anyone, please call your local emergency response line and follow the instructions that trained professionals give you. Also, always check whether the scene of the emergency is safe, and don't put your safety at risk to try to save someone else. We're also going to include some resources in the video description that go into more detail on exactly what to do in a given scenario, so feel free to check our work. Okay, now that that's out of the way, here are a few harmful myths you might have heard about first aid and what you can do instead. Let's say you're chilling at your local park when you see another park goer get all stiff and they crumple to the ground twitching. They're having a seizure. You spring into action and a crowd starts to gather. Someone shouts that you should put something in the seizing person's mouth so they don't swallow their tongue. Lucky for the person on the ground, you've watched this video, so you know that that's not great advice. There's not just one type of seizure, and they don't all look the same. A seizure can last from a few seconds to several minutes, and may cause the patient to stiffen, twitch, or jerk their limbs or face, stare blankly, lose consciousness, foam at the mouth, or collapse. But what they won't do is swallow their tongue, because that's literally anatomically impossible. And even if you could flip it backwards and swallow it, nobody's tongue is long enough to block their windpipe, so there'd be no risk of losing oxygen. Putting anything into a seizing person's mouth is risky for a whole bunch of reasons. You could break their teeth or injure their mouth, choke them with whatever foreign object you put in there, or cause them to aspirate on their vomit. And you might even get yourself bitten in the process, which isn't great either. Here's what experts say to do instead. First, if they're standing, gently guide them to the ground and clear the area of anything pointy or otherwise dangerous. If it's possible and you're sure there's no chance of a spinal injury, turn them on their left side with their mouth pointed down, placing their left hand under their cheek and their right hand in front of them. This is called the recovery position and will help keep their airway clear. Just don't use force to hold them in that position. Seizures can cause muscle spasms that are strong enough to break bone. And if you try to put counter pressure on the person while that's happening, you might cause further injuries. Also, experts say to call your first responders or get to the ER if you see any of the things listed on screen. Seizures can look pretty scary if you aren't prepared to deal with them. However, there's not as much to fear as you'd think, since a single one isn't all that likely to cause permanent issues unless those other risk factors are happening too. The bigger risks are the possible injuries that someone can give themselves while they're having one, and since now you know how to keep that risk low, you should feel prepared and confident to help if it's ever needed. And you can tell anybody trying to dispense the wrong advice to put a sock in it. And by it, I mean their own mouth, not the seizing person's mouth, because that's bad, you get it. Not all first aid situations happen out of the blue. Suppose you're at a protest downtown when the police start shouting for everyone to clear the area. The clearing doesn't happen fast enough, and the cops break out the pepper spray. And because pepper spraying protesters is now a common police tactic, it's common to see activists carrying jugs of milk to soothe the burn. This seems intuitive. After all, there's good scientific and anecdotal evidence that milk helps soothe your burning mouth after going too hard on the Carolina Reaper sauce. So it would make sense that milk can stop the burn everywhere else too. Milk works to soothe our burning tongues because the fats and proteins in milk bind to the spicy-causing capsaicin molecules and wash them away from our tongue's receptors. But while milk's great for helping you power through a plate of spicy food, it can do more harm than good in the eyes. See, milk isn't sterile, and while our digestive tract has built-in protections against the microbes found in milk, our eyeballs don't. And while the active ingredient in pepper spray is capsaicin and it activates pain receptors similar to those in your mouth, that's where the similarity ends. Plus, pepper spray isn't the only aerosolized weapon that's used at protests, and milk wouldn't work even in theory against tear gas or any of the other stuff. So while milk may be a welcome reprieve for Hot Ones guests, it's not recommended for pepper spray on the face. Experts say the best course of action is washing the face and skin with plenty of plain sterile water or saline and getting away from the area where the chemical weapon was deployed. Hopefully you don't ever need this particular tip, but you know, just in case. Now with some situations, the real challenge is knowing what not to do. Take this example. You're snowed in on a cozy winter night when your brother trips and smacks his head hard on the bookshelf. You aren't sure if he's got a concussion, but it's getting late and he wants to go to bed. But a lot of people say that if someone with a concussion goes to sleep, they can end up in a coma, so your sister says that you should keep him awake. Lucky for your brother, the evidence says that you don't have to make him pull an all-nighter. First, if the injury was bad enough to cause a coma, that would happen whether or not you let the person sleep, which is why you should call the doctor ASAP when someone sustains any head injury that's bad enough to make you worry. If the person who whacked their head gets super disoriented, their pupils are really dilated or are two different sizes, or they lose consciousness and can't be woken, those are all signs they need a doctor pronto. But if none of those things are happening, there's no reason to keep someone awake against their will. And even if you do have some of those worrying signs, you can get right back to your usual sleep habits after you see a doctor. Doctor first. I cannot stress that enough. Getting your sleep helps the brain heal, and research shows that when concussed people don't get their beauty sleep, their injuries don't heal as well. So as long as your brother passes all those tests, he's free to go to sleep. You can tease him about tripping in the morning. But our brains aren't the only extra important body parts worth protecting, so let's move from the head down to the neck and spine. Say it's Monday morning and you're walking to work when you see a pedestrian get hit by a car. They're alive and awake, but they're also lying in the street and it's a busy road, so you want to get them to safety. But wait, on TV, whenever you see someone getting moved out of danger, they strap them to a backboard to keep their spine safe. One wrong move and you could paralyze this accident victim for life, right? Well, it turns out there's not as much evidence for immobilizing the spine as you'd think. For decades, spine immobilization has been a standard practice for victims of car crashes and other blunt force trauma, like falls, getting crushed, sports collisions, or just general violence. It's based on the concept of delayed paralysis. See, in 1966, researchers published a retrospective study that focused on 2 patients, one of whom was injured in a car crash. The patient was able to move their limbs when they were transported to the hospital, but developed paralysis after a few hours, which was later determined to be caused by an undiagnosed spinal fracture from the crash. Sadly for this patient, the paralysis was permanent. Those researchers said that if the patient's fracture had been recognized in the first place and she'd had her spine immobilized, this could have been avoided. From then on, first responders were trained to assume that any patient with blunt force trauma has a spinal injury whether they showed signs of one or not. If you immobilize everybody's spines, nobody gets paralyzed. But it turns out that the fear of delayed paralysis is a bit overblown. This paper really only discussed 2 patients in detail. Studies have been pouring out since the 90s, showing that not only does immobilization not help if you're unsure about a spinal injury, but in some cases, immobilization could make things worse. Being strapped to a backboard can cause pain, pressure ulcers, breathing difficulties, and even worsen injuries. If the victim doesn't say they have any pain in their neck or back and can move their arms and legs, experts say there's no reason to brace the spine. But even with all of the evidence that's piled up against standard spine bracing, some healthcare providers still do it across the board. No pun intended. In any case, as long as the person in the road says their spine feels okay, you should feel free to get them out of the road. But look both ways. And before we get to our next myth, all research needs funding, including ours. So here's a quick ad break.
This SciShow video is supported by sendacake.com, the unique gifting experience for Valentine's Day, birthdays, and anything else you're celebrating. Whether it's for your Valentine, Galentine's, or in honor of any other beautiful relationships in your life, the Dubai Cake Explosion gift bundle makes a statement. This 3-layer bundle is loaded with paper butterflies that fly out when you open it and silver-wrapped caramels that cascade down the sides. Plus, you can customize the gift with photos of you together. And after the thrill of opening your explosion box, you get to enjoy a mini Dubai chocolate pistachio cream cake. You can get 10% off all of that using the code SciShow at sendacake.com.
You're at a pickup basketball game and someone on the other team falls to the ground. You check for a pulse and don't feel a heartbeat, but you see there's a defibrillator on the wall. Should you use it to restart their heart? I mean, that's what happens on TV. You hear a flatline, then the doctor pulls out the paddles and yells, "Clear!" After 2 or 3 zaps, the heart rate monitor starts beeping again, everyone relaxes, and Chasing Cars plays softly in the background. But yet again, that whole scene is not based on reality. That's not to say that defibrillators aren't lifesavers. There's a reason you see them in so many public places. It's just that they're not always the right tool for the job. See, there are a few different ways that your heart's electrical signals can get out of whack and cause your heart rate to go haywire. That messes up the coordination of the heart's different parts and gets everything beating out of sync, which can slow or stop the flow of blood around the body. That's called fibrillation, which is why we need to defibrillate, hence the name. Defibrillators work by pausing the heart's electrical signals and hope that they'll start back up in correct formation and the heart will get back to pumping. But defibrillators won't work on a stopped heart because there are no electrical signals to pause. Someone who's flatlining needs their heart actively pumped for them, and a defibrillator can't do that. But you know what can? CPR. Evidence shows that even when defibrillation is called for, the patient still needs CPR to prevent brain damage from oxygen deprivation. since chest compressions also expand and compress the lungs, oxygenating the blood. The fear is that unrealistic TV and movie scenes could give people the wrong impression about what to do and delay CPR for too long. The good news is that modern fancy defibrillator paddles are designed to detect the heart's electrical signals and advise whether a shock could help, and the machines usually come with instructions, which is why we recommend taking a CPR class just in case, so you can be confident that you know how to save a life. There are some situations, like those last few, where knowing how to do it yourself can be a big help. But for this next one, the real takeaway is the total opposite. You're on a lovely neighborhood bike ride with your partner when she takes a tumble. She yelps in pain, and after a close look, you think her shoulder got dislocated. Action heroes might grit their teeth, jerk the shoulder back into place, and go on with saving the day. This seems like a super tough move, but you probably shouldn't try it at home. Dislocated bones, especially in the bigger joints like shoulders, can be way more dangerous than they seem. A dislocated shoulder can come with all kinds of other injuries, like muscle damage, torn ligaments or tendons, and even nerve or blood vessel damage. It's a high traffic area with a lot of delicate bits in there, so knowing how to get the bones back into place while avoiding all of those sensitive structures is a huge challenge. It can be so tricky to fix a dislocation that in some states, EMTs aren't even allowed to do it because they aren't trained in the process. Plus, depending on the technique that's called for, popping a dislocated bone back in can be super painful, so you probably want some good drugs to get you through it. Now, that said, some people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or other medical issues might be extra bendy, and for those people, dislocations might be much more regular. In those cases, your doctor will probably have given you advice on how to treat yours at home. But unless your partner's doctor has said otherwise, they shouldn't be a hero and you both should hightail it to the ER. But sometimes an accident only becomes a full emergency because you can't get to help right away. Say you're out in the woods on a hike and your friend trips and gashes his leg open. It's bleeding pretty badly, but lucky for you, you've got a first aid kit that has a tourniquet. You go to put it on him and he's like, "No way, I don't want to lose my leg." What do? Let's talk tourniquets and amputations. Despite their current bad PR, we've been using tourniquets to stop blood loss for centuries. They work by restricting blood flow to the part of you that's bleeding. Think of a tourniquet like putting a kink in your garden hose to stop the water from flowing. However, a lot of people tend to think that using a tourniquet on an injury is basically a one-way ticket to Amputation City. After all, we know that blood is important for you, so it does make logical sense that deliberately cutting off blood flow to any body part could be bad. Thing is, tourniquets really only lead to amputations if you use them wrong. For instance, in World War II, a lot of medics would just slap tourniquets on people even if their bleeding wasn't that severe. And due to the logistics of field transportation, or in situations where there were just too many injured soldiers, those tourniquets would get left on for way too long. But tourniquets have become a lot less risky thanks to better devices and protocols. Most experts say that you don't need any formal medical training to be able to apply a tourniquet in an emergency without putting anyone's limbs at risk. But before you bust out that tourniquet, experts say you should try to control the bleeding with direct pressure, since that won't cut off all the blood supply to the limb. Push down really hard on the area above the injury to squeeze those blood vessels shut, and keep something absorbent like a cloth between your hands and the injured person's skin. If the cloth becomes saturated, add more fabric. Keep pressing, and try shifting to a different spot. If the bleeding stops with that pressure, hold it there until emergency assistance arrives. But if the direct pressure isn't stopping the bleeding within a few seconds, that's when some experts recommend busting out the tourniquet from your first aid kit. First aid courses will go over the specifics, but you usually want to put the tourniquet a couple inches above the wound, closer to the heart. So if they're bleeding from the elbow, you might want to put it about here. Avoid putting the tourniquet directly on a joint. Then follow the instructions on the label to tighten and secure it in place. If the bleeding stopped, congratulations, you did great. If not, the Red Cross says to leave the first one in place and then add another even higher up. Even if the tourniquet seems too tight, do not remove or loosen it. Leave that to a trained professional. We should add that the use of tourniquets can be associated with loss of limbs, but mainly because an injury severe enough to need a tourniquet is just more likely to end that way. What we do know is that using tourniquets also prevents you from dying of blood loss, which is pretty important. Once your friend gets some stitches, you guys should be back to hiking in no time. And if your buddy did need an amputation, as long as you did the tourniquet right, it probably wasn't your fault. So there you have it, a few of the most popular misconceptions about first aid. Knowing what to do and what not to do can make a huge difference. Now, if you really want all the best details on how to save a life, taking a first aid and CPR course would be ideal. Like I said, we're a science show, not medical doctors. But it's worth it for bystanders to try their very best with the most accurate information, like anyone would want for their loved ones. And most importantly, stay safe out there.